Ooh, I like the Oreos. And I feel like this lends itself to kicking us off with, before we get started into the big topics, ladies, what's your favorite flavor of Oreo?
I'll let Lauren go first, and owns the brand.
I'll go for it. First of all, thank you guys for having us. Super excited to be here today, and definitely had to tempt you guys with some Oreo visuals right here at lunchtime. So really excited to be here and chat Oreo. For me, I am less keen on it doesn't have to be like a particular flavor of Oreo, but I'm a big cream person, so it always has to be double stuffed. That's my only requirement.
Love it.
And hi guys, yes, thanks for having us. Echoing Lauren on the double stuff too, but also. Golden Oreo is my favorite. So I'm a rare breed, but I'm holding strong.
I'm with you there. I like the golden Oreos too. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. As Maggie touched on, we know that it's more important than ever for brands to stay relevant, especially within this given changing buyer landscape. Lauren, how is Oreo evolving its creative to really deliver strong equity messaging that still feels really customized?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I would actually start by saying that in order to really drive relevance, it kind of has to be looked at in two ways. And some of it, of course, is embedded within the creative, but really to really be relevant, it's kind of an approach that requires thinking beyond just the creative as well to really be effective and authentic. So I would say that being relevant really starts first with actually being relevant broadly. So thinking about being relevant in culture, and then also secondarily being relevant to the individual. So that really is more about, being a brand that has some meaning and is really connecting and adding value in the lives of the individual consumer. And then thinking about that specific piece of driving relevance, it's really a 360 approach. So it's beyond just the creative. It has to be showing up in everything that the brand does. So everything from product innovation to living the brand values through purpose work to reflecting those values in paid campaigns. And for Oreo in particular, having a brand voice that really stands for something and taps into cultural passions for people kind of throughout their different passion points really gives us a platform to be relevant. So ensuring that we show up in the same way in our creative from a comm standpoint is definitely really critical. And digital, of course, is a really great tool for that. So I think in particular, digital really unlocks the ability to get more customized, deliver more one-to-one messaging. And for Oreo, we really do strive to get to that one-to-one place. And we are still progressing. It's still something we're continuing to build our capability in. But I'd say in general, our approach is actually to start first and foremost with the platform. So really needing to be platform specific creative. There's no more, matching luggage. There's no more one concept, reformat it for different platforms. It's really that you need to think about kind of the mindset of the consumer when they're coming to different platforms. So, I know myself, I'm not going to Twitter for the same thing I'm going to TikTok for. I'm not going to Instagram for the same thing I'm going to YouTube for. And so it's accounting for that as you think about the concepts to launch on each of those platforms. So it's really customization actually starts first with the platform and the mindset the consumer is in. And then layering in the approach of getting to that more one-to-one messaging based on what those behaviors of that specific individual are, what their passion points may be. And for Oreo in particular, we use an approach called empathy at scale. And Marion would love for you to just kind of jump in and cover a little bit more about what that is and some of the tactics we've used this year to really get into empathy at scale.
Yeah, and for those of you on the line that have worked with Mondelēz, I don't think the term empathy at scale is new to you. And I know a lot of marketers are striving for that as their North Star. So just to break it down from a Mondelēz perspective, one, being a snacking brand it's actually hard to personalize your messages when you reach such a broad audience and there's so many potential opportunities to utilize versus, very specific need states that some products drive. So for us and for Oreo, especially having such a high household penetration and, consumers across all age groups, we really have to Lauren's point, lean on our platforms to drive some of those insights, but also just show up in a relevant way there. And then we're achieving the rest just through Oreo's, naturally driven equity. So empathy at scale for Mondelēz can mean a lot of different things based on the varying products we have. But it is truly taking, from the start of the creative concept to make sure that we're not just, creating one mass message that then gets cut down and, distributed everywhere. And more so thinking about where it's showing up, but also the consumer, their affinities, what's our way in, and finding multiple versions of that, so that we can be more, personalized in how we show up. And we believe that the more personalized the message, the more universal it actually becomes. So just because you're talking to one subset of people doesn't mean that, it's not going to resonate with others, because they see the connection, and it actually builds that empathy with the brand as well. And then just to give you some examples of how this worked for OREO this year, we worked across all our JBP partners to really understand why people are going to the platform for our particular, equity messaging. How do we tie in, the stay playful and kind of coming back from COVID and lockdown, and using OREO's, platform to help connect with the consumer in ways they maybe just naturally want to be, having fun online, creating those connection points. So Twitter is an example of us driving empathy at scale, where we created a customized OREO scopes, right? So you asked us at the beginning what our favorite OREO is. That's a very natural question when it comes to the brand. We married it with, a natural way to go to Twitter is to check your horoscope and to share something about yourself or find something out about yourself. So we created, based on how someone tweets and what they do on the platform, what OREO do they match with, and is that really what they like from a taste perspective? So it's just a fun way to connect and do it within the platform's, strengths, not just our own.
That's great. And I'm going to jump in real quick. There's, for those of you listening, there is a Q&A function. So please feel free to use the chat function, and we can answer questions at the end. Forgot to include that in the beginning. Back to empathy at scale. I think that makes a whole lot of sense, Marion. This seems to lead, though, being so customized by platform and personalized. It's a big ask of the creative agencies that you work with. Tell us a little bit more about that process and how that works.
Yeah, I can jump in a little bit here, and Marion, feel free to add as well. But I think, you're right, Amy, like it definitely is something that is a little bit of a challenge if you think about it from the creative standpoint. Like being more personalized kind of inherently means that you need more messaging, and that always means more time. It means more cost. It means a bigger ask from the creative agencies as well, just to get that sheer volume of assets created and out into the market. I actually think it's a place that continues to be ripe for a lot of innovation in terms of thinking about how to get more of those production efficiencies into models where you really need a bigger volume of assets than we have traditionally in the past. So I think, for us, it's something we're still exploring every day and learning about and figuring out. I would say there's a couple things that we've done so far. I would say, first and foremost, we have a great partner in the Martin agency, our creative agency, and they're, constantly exploring this with us as well. So it's everything from thinking about how we can create assets that are really kind of product forward. So think about, a really gorgeous visual of a cookie and a milk that can really serve as like baseline creative assets that really become agile and can be manipulated throughout the year to be dynamic. So kind of thinking about being smart about the type of assets we're creating so that there is that flexibility. And then I would say the other piece that we've tried in the past is also leveraging some of the platform capabilities. So you think about like a director mix or Google DCO and having those auto-optimized kind of intelligent platforms. We've definitely leveraged those in the past as well. But I would say there's still, more runway in terms of figuring out the best way to do it. But absolutely, the bottom line is it definitely does necessitate more assets, which ultimately is more work, more time, more cost. But it's something we're learning and looking for more innovation in every day.
Yeah, and to give the media perspective and just to build some context. So this is my first time on the brand side of the business in a media role, and I really do empathize with Lauren, empathize being the buzzword of the day, on, the quality control of our assets. And, especially as a food brand, we have to show up with taste appeal. So there's certain things we can't sacrifice just to be able to scale, right? So there are still hard decisions that have to be made on, where do we balance the quality of the asset with the volume? And that's still something I think everyone in our shoes is trying to figure out, and our partners are are helping us do that, right? By offering, their capabilities to us to scale as best as we can with our agenda in mind. Because we recognize, and I'll talk a little bit about the process of how we're trying to move that direction. Like, we recognize this digital first agenda is, one, it's not new, but for CPG organizations, like, there is some overhauling to do in the ways of working. And we understand what that's requiring of our agencies and of our partners. So this year, especially OREO, we doubled down on like making this our priority and really being able to look back on the year and say we did it, at least in spots, and we did it well. So we tested really new ways of working because we have the talent to do it. It's really just setting up the right checkpoints and places of success to maximize our agency skill sets within the process. So it starts all the way from, our INA team working more closely with our media team and creative team to make sure that the creative idea has enough legs to live this way. So it takes less time, to iterate and come up with concepts so that everything has a digital first way of thinking versus older TVC to digital thinking that used to be our ways of working. And then it moves into, how do we work with our creative teams to bring the JBP partners in sooner? Because as I mentioned before, right, a lot of the insights or reasons we want in with our consumer is driven by how they come to the platforms. So them having that seat at the table. And then we even on OREO, create an asset mix to really make choiceful decisions on which ones are we going to prioritize the more bespoke approach and which ones are we going to, to scale back a bit. And we work very closely now with our production AOR, our creative team, and media teams. It sounds like a no-brainer, but it is a lot of different ways of working. And I think if our JBP partners would attest, we have areas to improve on, but we're really happy to see, that the overall comm strategy can come to life when you work this way, so that the whole is kind of greater than the sum of all its parts. So
that's great. And I feel like as we're talking about, it's twofold when you customize per platform that you're on. You have the creative element that needs to be customized and personalized, but there's also the social element. You want to ensure that you're speaking to the consumer in the type of environment and that you have the same look and feel that platform that really resonates with the consumer on that platform. How has OREO's used this as an opportunity to address any social issues that have been able to grow and bring forth more awareness in this last year?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And I think it's actually the kind of conversations that are happening on social and the behavior that is related to that is, I actually think, the biggest way that digital has changed the future of marketing. Obviously there's, the enhanced kind of capabilities from a pay perspective, but it's really just the behavioral change and the expectations that come along with that from a consumer standpoint. We're living in an age where a tweet can and actually has started movements, right? From a social movement perspective, it really has started socially in that sort of environment. I think the other piece of that is because there is that ability to interact, to engage with these sort of movements, there's just more expectation that does happen. And I think in particular, if we're thinking about Gen Z, this is, an incredibly passionate generation who really has that expectation that all people are stakeholders in positive societal change, and that includes brands. So I think it presents a really interesting opportunity and a challenge for brands to think about how or if, we engage in those conversations. And social and kind of digital spaces really provide that opportunity. So it's one, because the platforms are lending themselves to longer form content, right? Like you can, instead of just the 30-second spot on TV, you have the ability to have content that spans for, several minutes and can really tell a story. You also have the ability to have more two-way conversation in this environment, right? Like it's not just a brand putting out a piece of media, but it's actually, a conversation that can happen between brand and consumer. So when it comes to those values, it's important, for brands to take a stand. Whereas before, we wouldn't see that as a traditional piece of business, but now it is, in a way, a part of business is to have that brand voice and those values and to really be able to communicate in a way that feels authentic and is contributing to some of those positive changes that we're really seeing that there's kind of the expectation to be a part of. And I think, that's really coming to life in a lot of different ways from different brands. I think You can look at like a Ben and Jerry's, who really uses their organic social presence to really communicate a lot of their kind of stance and values from a social justice standpoint. Or OREO specifically, we've used our social channels for longer form videos like Proud Parents, which was a really great example of us really providing a medium for storytelling that messages a lot of our brand values of inclusivity and our support and allyship for the LGBTQ plus community. So I would say, in general, it's definitely a great opportunity for brands to be a part of the conversation and to really connect with consumers, and also to be a part of change. Like, there's a unique platform and a unique set of resources that brands have that can really contribute in positive ways to a lot of the conversations that are happening now. So there is that opportunity to be a part of it, but it also needs to definitely be something that's considered really carefully. So it's important for it to be authentic. It's important for it to align with not just the values of the brand, but also the actions of the broader organization. So it goes beyond just what OREO can say, but how are we showing up with our employees? How does diversity look within the people that are working on the brand? How does it look internally, and do those values match across all the ways we're showing up? So yeah, I think definitely the digital social space is definitely a place where a lot of social issues are going to continue to be a part of the conversation. I think it will be a huge role of these social platforms going forward to continue to push those initiatives and agendas, and brands have to really be thoughtful about the best places they can authentically show up, and really being a part, not just opportunistically, but being a part in a way that's really going to actually help for some good as well.
Are there specific platforms that you think resonate the most from these type of messages?
For sure. I definitely think it depends on what the conversation is. But I'd say, again, just, thinking about the point that we were making earlier about platforms having different behaviors and people coming to different platforms with different mindsets. I definitely think Twitter is a place where, you see a lot of those conversations happening organically. Like, it's really, people are going there for news and to participate in these conversations, whether it's political or some particular interest or social justice initiative. So I think organically, there's a lot of conversation that's happening there. And as a brand, we've seen a lot of success in launching some of those conversations on platform as well, whether it be the video, like I mentioned earlier, the Proud Parents execution a bit ago, or even just participating in some of those conversations via comments or via posts. So I would say that each platform kind of has its role, but I would say in general, some of that behavior is just organically happening on Twitter, and there seems to be more receptiveness and engagement there.
Yeah, and balancing, when we do it from just an organic owned perspective versus paid, quite frankly, of, how are we going to produce and run media around this? But especially to Lauren's point, people have different laid back mentalities when they're going to some platforms versus they want and expect to hear brands' voices on others. So we really do balance that from the organic strategy we employ, and then from a paid perspective, it usually follows the same. But we want to still have the scale and make sure we stand behind our message, and that it's a larger part of our equity comms strategy for the year. So it's showing up everywhere in different ways.
Right. And I would just build on that a little bit as well, because I think it's a great point that there is a place for it that really thrives in an organic space, but it really is something that does have to be lived across everything. So it is, are we reflecting those same values when we communicate something from a paid perspective? Are we representing people in the way that we're, hoping to do as a brand value? And it's also even in the partnerships that we do, like a Lady Gaga OREO, like that was, there was a lot of thought and choice that went into a partnership like that, and choosing someone who represents and embodies a lot of the values that we have in a brand. So I totally agree with Marion in the sense that it's really something that has to come to life across the full spectrum.
So speaking about the Gaga partnership, we're talking a lot about how OREO is increasing its equity really at the top of the purchase funnel. Tell me some ways that you guys are using the shopping experience to stay relevant.
Yeah, great question. And honestly, probably the most pressing as we move into, the COVID trends that Maggie talked about, as we entered into this part of the call. We're fortunate enough, right, where we've played a lot at the top of the funnel because we are really leaning on just brand love, brand equity, with what Lauren and I manage. But as those lines get much more blurred, and the KPIs we set are different than just that, brand perception and brand lift, we have to really take advantage of the tools that are there from a media platform, closed loop sales perspective, if you will. So we're looking at, a couple different ways. I mean, one, let's just start kind of from what Lauren mentioned, from the Lady Gaga OREO integration and collaboration. We also had, Pokemon happen this year. And the reason I bring those up is just one, staying relevant from all the way from packaging to in aisle to online to our media campaigns is really important to OREO, right? We're not just testing new flavors. We're actually bringing that relevancy you're able to do through media into, the shopping experience. So we take that, very seriously all the way down to the product and packaging level. And tying it to consumer interests as well as, areas we know we have a right to play in. I also think, driving value back to the consumer is always kind of the first point of, is this worth a transaction, and how can OREO show up? So, we also have launched our D2C capabilities about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And those are really special to us because we're actually finding a different way to transact and give value back to our consumers within our D2C site versus it just being an extension of how they can shop online through, our retailers, social or in-store, right? We're specifically creating personalized custom OREOs in the way they can interact and purchase the product. And we believe finding those niche places when we're finding the new ways to close loop and to purchase is really important. And as we think about expanding that out, into like social commerce or, just transacting within, our standard media, that's definitely something we are looking to push into next year and really understand, how much can we drive there? Where have the behaviors shifted enough that we have a right to play in a, a lower price point everyday product? And we're kind of excited to test and learn there.
That's great. Tell me a little bit more about the D2C offering that OREOs has. It's super unique, and it's also it makes so much sense. It doesn't feel forced, which is why I feel like this is so kind of ahead of the game from a CPG standpoint.
Yeah. So, and Lauren, feel free to elaborate and add on. So it's our OREO ID product. So, it lives within OREO ID website where you're able to go and customize your OREO to gifting reasons, for personalized reasons, for really a bespoke way to engage with the brand. And it was already a behavior that people wanted to do, and we needed to make a capability around. So it was a natural fit for us to be able to launch in the D2C space with OREO in particular. There are a few other Mondelēz brands that have that same relationship with the consumer, and we can continue to find spots. But this one was something that was naturally being done. And we've been able to, really leverage it, and in fact, like sell out quite frankly on the capability. So we're excited on where that's going to scale. We've also leveraged the D2C site now for expanded reasons, like the limited time offers we're talking about. So when there is, a limited time offer with the Pokemon OREO, we'll create an experience on the D2C site because we know it's bringing fandom and a reason to visit and engage. Versus our base sales and everyday, family and everyday packs. Lauren, I don't know if you want to elaborate anything more on the OREO ID process.
Yeah, so I would add a few things. I mean, I love OREO ID for a lot of reasons. I think it does, so much from a brand and a consumer standpoint. I think, first of all, just thinking about the brand, it really does a great job of extending kind of that ubiquity of the brand and really extending the meaningfulness. And I think, OREO is a brand that people have so much connection with from, childhood into adulthood and beyond. And it's really extending the meaningfulness into different occasions. So that's why gifting is, really important for the brand as we think about continuing to build that out. And OREO ID is an amazing platform for that, and that you're able to customize messaging. You can send them, as gifts to people. So I love what it does from a brand ubiquity standpoint. It just really drives the meaningfulness of connection back to consumers. And I think from the consumer standpoint, it's very similar to what Marion was saying, just in the sense that this is a behavior that people have. Like, we opened this conversation with, what's your favorite OREO? Everyone has, some way that they like to consume an OREO, and OREO ID gives you the ability to have some of that customization that really reflects, your own personal kind of preferences of what you love in the brand. So I think it does an amazing job of driving those kind of two sides of relevance, both in terms of being culturally relevant and then relevant to the individual. And it absolutely does give us an extension to continue to build out platforms, whether that be Lady Gaga or Pokemon, really having those experiences that really feel that much more special, that much more custom. So having those kind of first release opportunities or, you know, having the ability to purchase them online, I think really does just further extend us and having that more direct relationship with consumers.
That's great. You touched on everyone loves Oreos, right? It's just a matter of which Oreo is your favorite. This lends itself nicely to the Q&A portion. Somebody asked, if everyone loves an Oreo, how does the brand segment focus on audiences, whether it's family, Gen Z college students, guys who eat 10 Oreos in a sitting, etc.?
Yeah.
Do you want me to start or you?
Go for it. You go for it.
Okay. Well, that is a great question. We find ourselves, you know, revisiting that every time we look to launch, you know, our equity messaging for the year. But first, we obviously have to have like a strong baseline of just who is purchasing our product, right? Who is our baseline consumer, just from an audience standpoint. But then from there, you know, we are a broad product, so we're able to find the swim lanes that work within our creative messaging. And that kind of goes back to the beginning of the conversation where we're talking about, you know, we have an insight on how do we build that stay playful and what is that translating to this year. And that's when we work with our creative agencies to understand, okay, what is the way in now that we have that grounding together, we know our base audience and purchasers. So do we want to go through the lens of affinities, music, sports, art, or does the idea actually lend itself more to just very simple occasion-based, time of day, flavors? Like that's why it's like there are so many ways in when you talk about like the concept of empathy at scale, and it really can translate in multiple ways. So every time we have a new creative concept, we come back to the table and understand which one of these and which avenue is the best to take to be rooted in the core concept.
Yeah, I would jump in a little. I think it's a great question, and it's a blessing and a curse, right? Like, it's amazing to work on a brand that is so incredibly ubiquitous that, I mean, our penetration is really, really solid. Just in 1 year, we're at over, 55% of households. So at any given moment in the year, at least half of the people in this country have Oreos in their pantry. That's amazing. If you look at that from a 3-year perspective, that number is actually in the 70+ percentile. So within the last 3 years, most people, the overwhelming majority in this country have had an Oreo. And so, within that, you do have the opportunity to really think about what are the things that really people feel passionate about. It goes back to thinking about it from the 360 approach as well. So everything from our limited editions, those are meant to tap into those passion points of each unique different person, whether you're a Lady Gaga fan, a Pokemon fan, a Game of Thrones fan, having those passion points within the product. And then to Marion's point, what's the objective for the brand that year? Are we really looking to push into some of those new spaces with growing the penetration among those who might be lighter or lapsed? And if that's the goal for the brand, then, what does that look like? Who are those people? And how do we think about how we can speak to them specifically? So I think it's a balance, and it's really something that we look at from the total brand strategy and what are those objectives for the year and who do we specifically want to speak to reach those objectives?
I think that makes a good point. And with Oreos you talk about the percentage of households that have Oreos in them, which is the penetration is crazy. What happens when Oreos aren't on the shelf? Have you guys had to deal with any of the challenges this year that most other CPGs have with regards to supply chain? And some of that backlash from COVID?
Yeah, for sure. I can speak to that. Yes, we're definitely no different than anyone else. I think it's hit literally every single industry that we have supply chain issues that really were spurred from the impacts of COVID. So we've definitely had to deal with that. And it really comes down to careful coordination with our sales team, our supply chain teams, and really managing that relationship with our customer partners as well from a retailer perspective. And so, it's a really dynamic approach that requires a lot of hands-on, but I would say in general, it's really a little bit of a mixed approach. So if there's not this particular Oreo product available, how do we focus on the ones that are there? and continue to just kind of be available for consumers in the best way that we're able to show up.
That's great. We can go back to another live Q&A. Do you measure resonance and relevance? And do you track this as a KPI for your campaigns?
That's another great question. We do. So we have a lot of different ways to do that. And Marion, feel free to jump in from a media perspective as well. I would say from a brand equity perspective, there's definitely things that we have that are trackers. So every year we have kind of a refresh of how we're doing in terms of awareness, how we're doing in terms of brand love, in terms of meaningfulness. And there's like strategic approaches behind each of those levers and how we continue to drive that. So yes, it's definitely something we measure. We have a couple of different frameworks and research partners that help us with that, but it's definitely something that we track at least on a yearly basis. And then we also track within campaigns. And to the point of the earlier question of there being a lot of different types of people that are eating Oreo, we do also look to track within groups to ensure that, again, we're staying relevant in the broader sense, as in relevant in culture, but also we're relevant to individuals, and starting to think about that at a community level is, is there any particular group we're losing relevance with, or are we, broadly tracking in the right direction across all of those? So definitely something we measure at least yearly.
Yeah, and then the relationship of relevance to sales, when we think about ultimate KPIs, right? Like, is it driving brand growth, brand share, and sales of the brand? So we'll measure that all the way through, and especially where media is concerned, where are we driving the most impact to sales? We recognize, relevancy and engagement do link to sales. There are some deviations though, when you talk about just general brand equity and, product and value awareness, and then the purpose work that Lauren talks about of finding the right spaces to talk about stances and take a stand, and have that purpose-driven work. We're still trying to figure out the relationship that has to sales, but we know that matters less, honestly, in those instances. Like, to Lauren's point, it's what the brand stands for, and it ties back to our values. So we know it's crucial and important, just in our overall brand tone and voice. So even if that takes a back seat, we recognize, the importance of it holistically to our, our audiences.
That's great. And with the holidays right around the corner, I know that Oreos always has some special flavors that come out. How with digital marketing efforts will Oreo stand out from some of the other players in the digital space, knowing that it gets a little crowded around the holidays?
Yeah, so I'm actually super excited about the holiday campaign we have coming out this year. And stay tuned, you should see it relatively soon, within the next week or two. So excited to see some of the response there. I think from a digital social standpoint, again, it's going back to those like platform specific ways in. And so we've seen that what works really well for the brand on Instagram and Pinterest, for example, is different than some of the other platforms. So generally, we know that there's this incredible consumer behavior around recipe usage. For the brand in general, it actually happens throughout the year, but you can imagine that at the holidays, it's really a big baking season. People are always in the kitchen together making recipes, and it's a moment that Oreo is naturally a part of. And so what we've seen work so well for us with Instagram and Pinterest in particular is really having that recipe content that really focuses in on kind of what's happening organically in behavior. So you'll definitely see some of that coming to life, as well as really kind of focusing in on that. And then a broader campaign that I don't want to spoil for you, but just, a really fun way to think about how Oreo can show up and feel special in the season.
That's great. I'm excited to tune in for that, or tune online, wherever that will show up.
Yeah, and I'll just to tie back to another question and be transparent with the group, right? Like, because of the supply chain issues, like our ideals and ways of working for holiday like are a little different this year than years past. But we're really excited about what Lauren alluded to, like the platform we're launching. Like, we're launching a new creative platform, an idea that will carry us through the holiday season. So from a creative standpoint, we're really excited, and hopefully we'll see, the year over year growth of that, and being able to leverage all the platforms across for the holiday.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have time for one last Q&A. What are some unique digital transformations the pandemic accelerate for the brand? Or what are some unique digital transformations? Let's see. What unique digital transformations did the pandemic accelerate for the brand? There we go.
Okay. Digital transformations. Well, I guess.
Or other than, I know you guys spoke a lot to the D2C piece, and a lot of folks are going online more, and so you're having to customize digitally, right?
Yeah, I think it's going to help. Well, being a CPG brand, as I mentioned, from more of a lower cost point, barrier to entry, we're not usually a standalone product you buy just alone, right? But the behaviors and the on-demand aspect of online now has opened doors for us more than we expected, and or accelerated that behavior in like a 1-year time frame that we expected to be 3 years from now. So I think it just helps us prioritize some of the things we knew were coming based on how other markets transact. So definitely the commerce piece and testing that and understanding it. I'll also just say, the prioritization internally of the importance of digital first thinking and behaviors moving from, how you access TV viewership. The word TV isn't the same anymore as it used to be. It's you're watching streaming, you're watching all these different ways of your downtime, which to us as historical marketers, we always wanted that grand stage, right? Of you sit down on the couch and you watch something long form, where we know that's changing. There's people at night that isn't how they even relax anymore. So finding those new spaces, I can't say we're fully there yet, but it has accelerated quite a bit. And I would say the OREO team, we've really embraced, what does that mean? What does that mean for a holistic asset planning, back to Lauren's point, and where we show up?
All right, and full circle, bring it back to empathy. We had a question about, are you guys currently activating any media around company purpose initiatives? I know you spoke company purpose or social initiatives. Is there anything live right now?
Yeah, so we do have a longstanding allyship with the LGBTQ community, as I mentioned earlier, and that's now gone on for over a decade. I think we're actually one of the first movers in that space to be brands that are vocal about, supporting causes and values. So we do have more to come. Again, don't want to spoil anything, but that relationship will continue. And there's ways that the brand is actively working on to continue that support and to actually grow that support and broaden the way that we're showing up. And there's some other things that we're looking to as well from a brand standpoint, other value or other extensions of the values that we have as a brand, and looking to support a couple of different initiatives as well. So it's something we are definitely evaluating ongoing and want to make sure we're doing from a really authentic space. And I definitely would say that allyship that we have, in particular with the LGBTQ community, is something we'll continue to build and expand over time, and something is in the works now.
That's fantastic. Any big surprising trends of this last year? I know that we all saw the e-commerce coming, right? And that we'd have to change. I don't think anybody anticipated having to change as quickly as we did. Any big digital trends that were surprising to you guys at OREO this last year?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I would say surprising, but I do think what's interesting, not even just this year, not even just with OREO, but I would say in general, just watching how UGC is having a bigger role in the way that brands communicate, I think is really interesting. I think in a couple of different ways. I think actually thinking about the earlier question about what has, the pandemic sort of changed from the way that we think about digital. I would say production was one of the first things people had to rethink, as people weren't flying to shoots. You have to think about, you can't hire talent at this moment. Like, how do you still communicate a message? And UGC is something a lot of brands turn to, including OREO. And so I think that what's really interesting is I see that being something that endures over time, is continuing to leverage UGC in different ways, whether that be from a production standpoint or thinking about like an organic social strategy, continuing to leverage that as engaging content. So I would say that's something that OREO definitely took more advantage of starting with the pandemic, and I think will continue to be important, especially with the rise of platforms like a TikTok, where you need to really show up with more of that kind of native to platform, organic sort of, not as high production value quality sort of asset. So I'd say UGC is definitely something I'd see continuing to be a trend, and is something that we've taken part in, I would say even more since the start of the pandemic. Yeah, Marion.
Yeah, I think it honestly just tipped everything over that we were anticipating. I mean, I'll just list them quickly, like just screen time in general. It's unbelievably like, will we ever go back to less screen time like we had before, which we already thought was a lot, but it just tipped the scale. How you view, your video content online, or what you do to relax is much different now. I'd say expectations from brands are much higher, and that's accelerated through the pandemic and through a lot of the social causes that happened during the pandemic. I know that's not media driven, but it affects all of us. And then of course, the commerce aspect and the on-demand nature now of grocery that never existed before outside of major cities. So there, it's all the things we thought. It's pretty crazy to see it happen in such a short amount of time.
Right. Well, it's clear that OREO has really taken a front seat with regards to the digital innovation game, and I'm excited to see more to come in this coming year. And I'm very excited to see this new platform we're hearing about around the holidays.
I couldn't agree more.
So much.
I'm on the edge of my seat with that teaser. Can't wait to see what comes.
Halloween's over. It's holiday now.
I know. Right? I'm ready. Put up the trees, the lights, cue the music. I'm with you. I'm with you, Marion. Well, thank you so much, ladies, for what was an amazing discussion. I particularly appreciated the commentary around the evolution and the messaging of OREO to stay relevant, right? That's so squarely into what we're finding with the consumers want to stay more connected, particularly as we think about this empathy at scale. I just love that term and that concept in general. So thank you guys for such a great discussion. I also will say, from a personal perspective, number one, as a celiac, I greatly appreciate the diversification into gluten-free. OREO, talk about a trend change for me, sample size of 1, now household staple on my shopping list every 2 weeks. So awesome. So publicly, thank you for that. And secondarily, as someone who's 7 months pregnant, your background really is crushing me right now. So I might have to go partake in my gluten-free OREO. So thank you both so much. And Amy, thank you for great questions and great conversation.